Hi there, welcome back again. We're now into the second part of this TS-453 setup. Just reminding you, this is a setup following the steps through for configuration of this NAS in a business environment. This particular NAS is the NAS used in one of the branch offices. We'll be coming to another video. We'll be doing a second video on the configuration of the central machine used in the central office. So just a refresher, this one's the branch office machine. So the overall business requirements of this customer, this is an actual SMICBox customer implementation, is that there will be a NAS in each of the offices, and the central office will be using a much faster TS-453A NAS, which has got an Intel i3 processor. Now, the reason why the central office is having a faster machine is not necessarily for networking itself, because a slower machine would more than adequately cope with that, but because of the nature of the synchronization between the sites, the requirement to run Windows Terminal Server on the NAS in the central office as a virtualized server, the faster processor is required. The third important point is failover. This particular business wants complete failover, such that if any one of the machines fails, any one of the NASs fails, or it may not be a failure of the NAS, but perhaps the internet provider has disconnected the service for whatever reason, a modem failure, a router failure, there can be a number of other reasons. The workers of that site could, at a pinch, log into any one of the other sites and work remotely, pretty much the same, having the same access and the same facilities as they would have in the local office. In the primary purposes of the NAS is file sharing and sync between offices, quite obviously, backup and access control, so that's the control of which user has access to what folders and facilities, and remote access, so that people can have the same level of access remotely. They want to be able to use virtualization and run Windows PCs or servers. The nice to haves that they're looking at are the ability to use multimedia hosting, stream music and sound, not necessarily that important for the business side of it. Surveillance and monitoring is also another great feature, a nice to have in this case. Signage station, which was of interest to them, the ability to set up on the NAS a series of advertisements that can be streamed to a high definition and television in the reception of each of the branch offices. The branch itself, they want the ability to control all the NASs centrally, and any changes they make to the central NAS is then replicated across all the offices. The workers want to be able to change or move to any one of the other offices, perhaps just visit one of the other offices and work from that another office for that particular day, and their security and access permissions are immediately available to them from wherever they're working. All administrative functions need to be wherever possible automated. The ability to manage and maintain the system remotely is very important, and the ability to upload and backup is important. But in this case, the branch offices have ADSL 2+, and ADSL 2+, as you'll know, has a maximum download capability of 10 megabits per second, which is good, but the upload is only rated at 800 kilobits per second, and in our tests we find that it doesn't often get to even to 800 kilobits per second. So upload. So there needs to be a smart or intelligent NAS backup and synchronization regime implemented for this business that takes advantage of the out of business hours to upload files to the other offices, and synchronizes important information that should be synchronized real time. So now we're going to start the actual setup itself. We key in this URL into a browser and we are presented with a screen. We are setting up a 4-bay NAS, and in this case we go and find the model, the exact model. Press start. It's going to present you with these three options: setting up the hardware, which we've actually done in the last video section. Setting up the firmware was also done in the last section. if you remember, after setting up the hardware and putting in the disk drives in the last video, we plugged the monitor and keyboard and mouse into the back of the NAS and did a local installation. This document here is telling us that there is actually another way to do it. There's a piece of software you can download called QFinder Pro, and you can install it on your PC, and using that you can install the firmware. But we used this option using the local HDMI input. Now that that is done, the NAS is actually operational. So if we put in the URL into our web browser here of the NAS, it should just fire up. So let's give that a go. The URL assigned in the last video section was 17. Sorry, the IP address was 17, and to access that you have to use port 8080. At this point you're presented with a logon. So the NAS is up. The standard admin password brings us to the maintenance screen, to the QTS console rather. First thing it asks you for is, do you want to download the latest version of the firmware? You would always say yes, especially in a new installation. You want the NAS to have the very latest firmware. As I mentioned in an earlier video section, the installation of the NAS in the first place uses the standard firmware that's shipped with the box. This firmware that ships with the box could be at any version, but it's always available to you, and you should always take the option to upgrade to the latest version, which is going to be downloaded from the internet. So we'll say yes to that and continue, and off it goes. Now this takes a few minutes, so I'll just pause the video. Now it's finished downloading. It begins the update part of the process, so we'll just pause the video again till that's finished. Now the update's nearly finished, but I'll just seize this opportunity to state the obvious while we're waiting for it, and that is, of course, that while the NAS is installing firmware or updating or doing any updates, in fact, you should obviously never turn the NAS off. You should wait for it to finish and let it give you the appropriate prompts as to when it's fully operational. Now, as I was speaking there, I could hear the NAS in the background giving 2 beeps, which is indicating that it has started to reboot. So I'll say yes to that. Oh, sorry, so the 2 beeps was indicating that it had finished. Now 1 beep is indicating that it's rebooting. I can hear it in the background. So we'll pause the video again for a minute and let that run through and reboot. Now we've rebooted, it is time to log in again. This user ID and password is the standard user ID and password provided by the NAS by default. You can look it up in the documentation. At some stage I'll change this password to one that's more secure, obviously. A quick explanation of the changes that are in the latest version of the firmware, which we have just installed. You can read that at your leisure. Some quick tips on Quick Start, which again you can read at your leisure. I'm just going to clear all those messages because they're to do with the fact that the volume wasn't there and I hadn't created the volume yet. Any further messages that I see in that message area I should pay attention to.